Hello. Hey everyone. My name is Palash. I'm a security engineer at CloudSec. I work in the vulnerability intelligence team, and where we build tools to automate security. Uh, so today I'm going to be talking about my bug bounty and security experiences throughout. I recently joined CloudSec, like it's been half a year. So this is what I'm going to be talking about. Uh, the first half of it is going to be like introduction stuff and basically telling my journey, and the second half will get technical into bugs and tricks and all that stuff. Okay, so uh, this is basically my security timeline. 2016 I started college and I started really getting into security. And so bug bounty was always on top of my mind that this is something I need to do. 2018 I reported a bug to McDonald's, but there was no response. Then yeah, so as you can see, the point of this is to show you that I'm not really a bug bounty pro. In fact, recently I have got my first bugs this year. So in 2017, McDonald's India had a data breach, and so in response to that, they uh, announced a bug bounty program. So while looking at this site, scanning the subdomains, I found an internal panel where, so it was supposedly employee only, but looking through its JS files, I found an endpoint where, even though like it required authentication, even if I did not send an authentication header, it still gave me the response back. The API was basically a get all users, but in fact it like dumped the user table completely, including plain text passwords. So I was about to access the back office, you know, interface of McDonald's, creating new delivery zones, creating new stores, changing the in-app functionality. It was a big bug. But then I sent it to them, and basically I got no response after this email. So all I wanted was some free Mac aloo tikkis, but yeah, even I didn't get them. So continuing, this is my HackerOne profile screenshot. As you can see, I joined in 2016, but there's like no bugs at all. And I've been constantly trying over these years to find something, and it gets real frustrating because I have been learning about computers and security as far as I remember. In fact, like this 2016 was when I seriously got into security, but like I was learning about it even before then. So the problem was I became stagnant. I did not have guidance, and so I did not know how to advance my skills. So this really changed in 2019 when I started playing CTFs. So CTFs, for those of you who do not know about them, are like competitive hacking events. So they're like hackathons, but you're actually hacking. And it's just not restricted to web security. There's like Android security, memory corruption, there's reverse engineering, like every branch of hacking possibly. And it's usually they are very short events. They're like 24 hour or 48 hours events. So you always have this thrill of like solving it fast. You can't slack off. Uh, by playing CTFs, what happened was I started getting that adrenaline rush when you like break into things. So that was basically in 2019. You can see like I started playing from like I just named a team according to my college name, and I was doing okay. But then like over the year, over the time, over the few coming months, I started learning about all things. And uh, again, after I moved out of college, this team. Okay, so I forgot to tell you what CTF time. CTF time is uh, basically it's a global dashboard of all CTFs. So we list out upcoming CTFs, It will list out leaderboards, it will list out teams and the rankings and all. So these are all CTF time screenshots. So again, I started out okay, but then I started getting into, at least India size or India wise podium stages. So this was uh, the photo on the left bottom is from Cybrix CTF. So top 5 teams from all BRICS nation uh, were supposed to go to Russia and play attack defense against top teams from like China, all those BRICS nations. So that's what I'm saying is like I started getting into like top 5 India podiums, and uh, but again this event which was supposed to happen in Russia, the sponsors backed out, and this happened like in Baroda in Gujarat. But yeah, so and again the other screenshot is from Nalcon this year, where again my team came second in a hardware CTF challenge. So what I wanted to say from this was CTFs are very good to take your basic knowledge and like push it really fast. So they provide you practical experiences. They're very good if you want to advance in security. So coming to my first actual bounty, so the McDonald's one didn't actually got paid, and by I think 20 when I joined CloudSec, I had to fill those performance goals sheets. Okay, and in that one of the goals I've written was like I need to get my first bounty. It's like it's been too long. I need to get it, and then so back in June I found my first valid bug. So Paytm has a bug bounty program. It's a good program, and basically the bug was I was able to get the wallet transaction history of any Paytm users. So this particular endpoint that you see did not check the authorization correctly. Uh, you could just put it's basically a IDOR bug, but with another element added that it requires some authentication, but it did not check the authentication correctly. So this was my first bug. I got 35K for it, and I think I'll just give you an introduction, give you a walkthrough about this bug. So Paytm has a microservice-based architecture. So when you're logging into the main site and you want to access, do a authenticated request on a different domain, so Paytm does this by using a SSO token. So if you could see, this was the SSO token. Okay, and the bug was the few customer service API, they were checking the existence of a valid SSO token. They expected that the request, if it has if it has a valid SSO token, it's good to go. But the problem was it did not check the permissions of that user. So if I was able to get the complete, like very detailed insight into their wallets. Uh, so yeah, that was my first bug, and that's like how I've been like pushing bug things into bug bounty from the last few months. So let me just resume my PPT. Yeah. So looking back, I started analyzing my mistakes. Okay, so I tried bug bounty for a long time. I tried it for like 4 years without success. So just give me a moment. There's some noise. Yeah, so I started, as I said, like I tried a lot for 4 years. So when I got my first bounty, I started looking at what mistakes that I could have made, that I made. So the first was choosing too big a bounty scope. So if you are aware about Verizon Media, wait. Hello. Yeah. So if you're aware about Verizon Media, they have, if as you can see from the screenshot, 400,000 subdomains. And the problem with this, with choosing such a large bounty scope, is that it's too easy to get lose focus. So whenever you are trying to analyze a subdomain, and if you're not finding anything, you can you're very prone to giving up quickly because there are so many of them. The one you are trying to might not be it. So that thought is always there in your mind, and that's why I think when you're starting out, you should not choose too big a bounty scope. The converse of this is also very true. So when you are choosing a target, I think that bugs come up with growing scale and tech complexity. You know, as a product grows, as the complexity grows, as the scaling grows, then only bugs start coming. Okay, so few programs like Magisto, where they have just like one single video related application, there's very less likelihood that you'll find a bug. So do not choose a big bounty scope. Do not choose a little bounty scope with little targets. The next thing is just mute yourself from the Twitter, Twitter bombardment of information, because when you go on Twitter or when you follow any kind of bug bounty related news, you'll see people getting bugs every day, and that makes you think they are easy to find, you can get them, but that's not really true. So so if you could see this, this guy just muted those words on Twitter. You just filter out that information and temper your expectations. This is the biggest issue, where you spend too much time in recon. Basically, recon is when you're starting to target a program, you find out what targets are there, you find out its subdomains, you identify the tech that's running on it, which server, which language, what all components are there. You do URL fuzzing to find out additional endpoints. So when you look at it, there's like hundreds of programs, each having thousands of assets, and like each having tens of thousands of endpoints. So the current landscape of the tools is not adequate to handle this kind of information, because I'm not sure how many of you have actually started working on this, but you'll find that the process involves running sublister or sudo. You'll just put it a domain and you'll get basically a text file of results back, and then you run those text files through another tool which will give you maybe IPs, and then you take that tool, the output from that tool, and put it to a fuzzer or something. So there is a lot of good command line tools, but there's nothing that lets you organize this information. So I'll just play this quick video from Hackluke. I think he works in Bugcrowd.
Like most top bug bounty hunters, I have this system that I coded with a couple of friends, and it basically keeps track of every bug bounty asset I've ever, subdomains, IP addresses, and some other stuff. And then it scans every one of those hosts for whatever vulnerability that I scan a POC for, that I code a POC for. Okay. Now, think about this. There are 3.5 million subdomains in my database right now. Okay. All bug bounty hosts. Every single day there are CVEs and 0 days that get released. Now, even if there's a 1 in a million chance that a host on the internet is vulnerable to one of these CVEs, and I'm scanning for it, I'm going to find 3 of them. I could.
So yeah, even the probability calculations are a little off, but you get the point. There's like so much data out there that this traditional, methods of organizing them does not work. So when I started bug bounty hunting this year, I thought that I'll not spend too much time on recon and like just automate that stuff. So I'll just give you an overview of the tool that I built. I'll just give you a demo. Yeah, so you can see my screen, right? This does not involve this is just a tool to process information that is already given out by other tools. I'm not making a new tool for subdomain scanning or this thing or any other recon this process. What I'm doing is making a tool to manage that information. As you can see, this is a dashboard, and you can create projects, add collaborators to like work on the same project. Once you click a project, you get a list of subdomains that you're trying. You can put more, and it'll just scan it. Obviously, again using existing tools, but then what I'm trying here is again just the ability to organize this information. And one thing that's missing in a lot of current tools, so there are a few tools like this, ReconNG, and like I don't know, I forgot the name of the other, but what they do is just present you this information with a beautiful UI. They do nothing to let you process this information. So I'll tell you what I mean. I think the search interface is very useful here. It's the most useful thing here. So if I just wanted to find out all the endpoints which are HTTP, which all the subdomains which have HTTP, maybe I want to look out for Nginx, or I could maybe I just wanted to look for pages that are not the normal 200 pages. So this gives you the ability to organize information. You can add tags on them, you can create comments, and then yeah, so again similarly you could do it for just this search interface. Similarly you could do the same things for endpoints. So what I've done is I've integrated the burp HTTP proxy with this. So all the subdomain and recon data, I'm now combining it with the endpoint data, what all requests there are. So this is just, you could again use that search and try to look out for certain headers and search again. So all these search parameters are internally converted to Elasticsearch DSL, which means you can write queries and build out alerts for a lot of things. So I'll just give you an example. I think Sparsh shared a link earlier, a few months earlier in the group, where you could, it was basically a same origin policy bypass using browser cache. So whenever you have these 3 headers, e-tag tells you if the content is to be cached or not. And then if you have something like access control allow credentials false, which will disable authenticate, or which will disable sending cookie or session data to cross origin request. But because this e-tag is there, you could force the browser to get it from the cache, and that way I'm not really explaining what this bug is. I'm just telling you that all these simple bugs where something like this, I could just write a Elasticsearch DSL query, which will like look out for these three headers, and whenever I browse the internet and my burp, proxy catches one, it will just put me an alert. So this is the kind of thing that I wanted to build, where like I stopped looking for these low hanging vulnerabilities. Whenever you're bug bounty hunting, you will not actually look for this kind of stuff, right? Because there's like hundreds and thousands of them, and you can't like manually look out for each of them. So having such a system allows you to just focus on the, like, maybe not exactly high severity bugs, but focus on focus on the the complex part of the pen testing. Yeah. So again, so after this, I'll just quickly tell you about a very good bug I found recently. So the Paytm first, I found another, like, a couple of bugs similar to that bug, and this was something different. So I was helping a friend build a video calling app. So if you don't know, every video calling app uses WebRTC internally. So WebRTC is the name of that technology that like enables you to have communication, video communication. So so this is something that I do every time. Whenever I learn a new technology, I also trying to find out the security best practices and read up related bug reports. If I'm developing something in Fast API or some Express or Node.js, I'll just like see the landscape, see the current security, what sort of bugs could be there. And so when I was researching WebRTC, I came across this 2018 Slack bug. Turn servers allows TCP UDP proxying to internal network. So again, I like checked in the tool I built if I knew a turn server. I had a turn server in my list. So what exactly is turn? I'll just I'll go a little in depth about this bug because I think it's a cool bug. So suppose two people wants to talk to each other, client A and client B. They want to video call each other. Okay, so there's like three components that are involved that enables you to have video calling communication. So if A wants to communicate with B, first of all, A needs to know the address of B. So all this metadata, signaling between clients is done through a client server, signaling server. This is basically just, it just relays information from A to B. Okay, but normally when you are browsing internet, or like normally when you are online, you usually have a NAT in between. This is basically a router. This could be a router. This could be any like intermediary. So when client A wants client B to connect to it, it needs to open up a port in this router. So if I'm sitting behind a Wi-Fi router, for example, and I have my internal IP address like 192.168.1 dot something, and I have a public address. Okay, so to all the users, only my public address would be visible. So if someone needs to connect to it, my router needs to know that this should be forwarded to this user inside this private network. So there's something called a stun server. It is used to open a port on the NAT. So client A just like creates this thing, TCP UDP connection to stun server, and by doing that, it opens up a port. Okay, and now this stun server tells this port and IP information to client A, which then sends it to client B. Okay, so normally client B can just like communicate with this public port directly. But what happens sometimes is this router either like it firewalls UDP traffic, or it does not allow anyone except stun server to communicate, because this connection was open from client to stun. It will not allow client B to connect to it. There's like not all the routers do it, but like 10-15% of routers do it. So you need something called a turn server. What is a turn server? It's basically a proxy. Client A tells turn server that forward this data to client B and like give whatever it sends back. So it just acts as a proxy. Whatever client A is telling that, okay, send this data to client B, it will send it. The problem here is that the protocol, the turn protocol, does not restrict the address you're trying to proxy to. So currently client A tells, give it the IP and port of client B to connect to. But there's nothing stopping client A or an attacker A from giving it, private ranges. So what will happen is client A will tell turn server to connect to 127.0.0.1. So which it will be itself. Okay. So what this allows you to do is like create network request inside the servers that is running turn server. Okay, it's if you know about SSRF, this is like SSRF, but it's vastly more powerful because you're not restricted to HTTP. You can like connect to any binary service, non-binary binary service. Okay, so one critical way that an actual exploit would look like is you can ask, so if the turn server is running on AWS, you can ask it to connect to AWS metadata service and like basically own the AWS of that turn server. So yeah, back to how to exploit this bug. This Slack bug report mentioned a private tool. So the reporter he had some sort of internal tool to like target turn servers. There was nothing on the internet to exploit it. So after like waiting around for like few months trying to get something working, I tried to build my own turn client, and that would involve reading RFCs. So RFCs are basically these RFCs are like they describe the protocol, the actual protocol. So the turn protocol is actually an extension of Stern, and if you want to do TCP, there's another extension. So how do you build such a thing? You build the packet structure in Python and send it to a local server, and then like you can just put Wireshark in between and like analyze whether you're sending the right packets or whether like if the length is wrong or like all kind of protocol debugging. Wireshark, you can do it with Wireshark. So I started reading this RFC and like slowly building this client. This led to AWS metadata access, and then because I could like connect to any service, I could like just connect to a Redis instance and get RC. So this particular bug, I will not name the company, but the thing is, it got patched last week, and I haven't received my bounty, so I will not name the company. But this was traced back to a third-party component, and around 4 to 5 Indian banks were using the same third-party component to do their video KYC. So yeah, that was a pretty cool bug. And moving on, I'll tell you about some tips and tricks. So there's a lot of material online if you want to get into bug bounties. I'm not going to repeat that. I'm just going to focus on some things that I think I haven't found anywhere and are very important. So the thing with the first bug that I found on Paytm was there's like the only way to find such bugs is like just keep trying different endpoints, which there's a lot of people doing on the internet. And if you want to like consistently get bug bounties, you need to like focus on critical bugs or like complex bugs, and instead of doing just black box trying every endpoint and all that stuff. To do that, I think what is most important is like getting into the client side source code, because the server side source code is not known to you most of the times, and it's very important to understand how the client-side logic works. But this is a little difficult nowadays. So those of you who don't know, a lot of front end, by a lot I mean like a good amount of front end is written in like Angular, Vue, React, JS. Okay, and these are like modular. You don't have a single JavaScript. These are called single page applications, where something like Webpack will turn all your different files and like put it down into a few JavaScript files. It will minify the code. It will like take the, so if you're including a library, it will just import that code. It will obfuscate it. So something very clearly visible like this, okay, gets turned down to like, after Webpack builds it, it will look something like this. So the variable names are gone, everything is gone. You can't read it. So if a majority of code written nowadays looks like this, how do you actually reverse engineer this? So there's like few tips and tricks. First is, there's a website called jsnice.org. It's a research project, and what it does is it uses machine learning, and it renames those variables. It will like deobfuscate the files. It will try to figure out the type of variable. Okay, so it's a string, it's a boolean, it's like this class, and it will make this code a lot readable. So you can't like, it won't go back to like completely readable like this, but it will be so much better. But again, so running JSNice will not like magically do all the work. After the JS code has passed through JSNice, you like have to go through the code, and because like Webpack is built of modules, you need to like separate each of the modules from that file and like build up the original folder structure of the, so to debug that. The second is finding additional JS code. So Webpack has a feature called lazy loading. Suppose you have a website and there's like admin section, there's a normal employee section, there's many section, and because all these sites are single page applications, you don't want like all the code to like load at one time, because of, not because of security reasons, but because of performance reasons. So what Webpack does is it could use something like lazy loading, and it will split up your single JS files into chunks. So if you open the developer console of like any React app or some, you'll find these chunks and bundle and something like this. Okay, the trick here is, even though they are lazy loaded, you'll find references to the files that are not loaded in the bundle.js or similarly named file. So you can see the pattern here. There's like 2.chunk.833c. So this will always help you like find additional functionality. So yeah, the third thing that I want you all to learn is like learn JavaScript internals. So you not just how to develop in JavaScript, but there's like JS meta programming, where you learn about the JavaScript internal structures and all that stuff itself. One of the like cool part, not cool part, but yeah, one of the cool things about here is there's a proxy object in JavaScript. I think it was added in years 2016, like 3-4 years earlier. So basically what it does is it allows you to wrap an object, existing object, and allows you to override its properties. So suppose there's this empty dictionary, and I can put a handler to this dictionary. So whenever obj.hello, so whenever I'm trying to access the hello property, this get function will be called. Whenever I'm trying to set the hello thing, this set function could be called. So this could be used for a lot of debugging purposes. You could like wrap another object in proxy and log all the function calls. So you can obviously edit your JavaScript code to do that, but when you have very complicated minified source like the one WebKit gives, you can like just take the complex logic out of it and like put it in a separate proxy object. So again, like this is for an existing new object that I'm creating, but you could like also iterate over this variable and like recursively set the proxy on all the objects, and in that way, even though your code will be like 10-20 times slower, but you can put any logic here. So suppose I want to check if if a function is called with any function is called with this parameter, like containing login or something, anything, I could put my reverse engineering what I'm trying to find in actual code logic here. I think I'm short on time, so I'll just I think I'm over. Again, this proxy object is also, it could be used to find prototype pollution bugs. If you don't know about prototype pollution bugs, I'm not going to tell you like in detail about it, but in the last few months, there have been like plethora of prototype pollution bugs in JavaScript libraries and all that. So you can use that proxy object to like scan for these bugs. Again, I'm going to be open sourcing some tools. The turn exploiter, it will allow you to set like pick a turn server and then bind to an internal port, or you can like scan some IP, or like just send a HTTP request of this. I couldn't find any existing tools that would allow you to exploit open turn servers, so I'm going to be open sourcing this, and this Recon and asset management tool. So this is, I don't know if you could like tell it from the demo, but this is like work in progress, and it's not even like 40-50% done. So it'll take like a couple of more months to do this, but I'll open source this as well. Yeah, so I'm done. Any questions?
Palash, I think we
You
can
can
move
like,
the yeah. I think we can move the discussion to our XVGL community. Then they will talk there,
okay,
right?
okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, okay.